What's up, YouTube? Jeremy
Hey,
Rosenthal, Long and Foster here with Nick from Homeland Environmental.
how's it going, guys?
Got Nick here. We had the septic and well inspection, and I learned a ton today. So in Mount Airy, let's see here, we're at the front yard, and here's the green riser here. The septic is right in front of the house. We popped the lid, and Nick, what did you discover when you popped the lid?
So when we popped this lid open, we unfortunately found that the water level was too low. So when you have a septic tank, it's supposed to be a watertight container that's going to capture all of that fun liquid and solids that come from the toilet, shower, bathtubs, etc. But when you have that system not flowing correctly, what you end up running into is a leaking tank. So when you have these older systems, they're going to be mid-seams, right? First half is on the bottom, second half goes on top, and they're going to seal the middle. The problem with that style is not necessarily the concrete, but it's going to be the seal in between, if they sealed it at all. Sometimes these old systems, they just kind of slap the two halves together and called it a day because who's checking on them? The problem we have with it is that it's leaking where it not ought to be leaking. If you have, for example, not on this particular property, but if you have a property where your well's kind of close to your septic and that tank's leaking, guess what you're drinking? Yeah, that's right. All that nasty water is getting into your drinking source.
Yum. So what do we have here in these pink flags?
Yeah, so when you have your septic tank, that's going to clarify the liquid, but you got to deal with that water somehow. That's where we get into what's called a dry well. A dry well is a big pit in the ground where basically they have a large hole with dry stack cinder block and stone on the exterior. You're going to put a big fat concrete lid on top of it so that way you don't fall into it, of course. As you flush a toilet, the solids get stuck in the tank. That liquid will go to the pit to where it will work its way through the cinder block, into the stone, and into the surrounding soil. The modern version of this is what we would refer to as a drain field, a leach field. Similar concept, different style. Where we're at, this was very common up until about the mid-'80s. Nowadays, we don't do them because, you can put a crane through it and fall right into a 10-foot hole, and that's not a very pleasant way to go.
And the property we're at today was built in 1979, so right on time with how the house was built.
Yep, a very, very common setup. It's pretty much exactly what we expected. Benefit of having somebody who's very familiar with the area looking at your systems is they get very familiar with what type of shenanigans those particular builders in those time periods did. I knew that existed, even though the county can't give us records. I knew that existed because I've done like 6 in the neighborhood, and also I know that this time period, that's what they did. So when you're going to find them, a lot of times you get lucky and they actually have a lid at the surface where you can find it real easy, but this one doesn't have that. So how you have to look for it is using a metal detector and a probe, looking for the rebar, so that way you can figure out where the thing's hiding, and then you can get it dug up if you want to put a lid onto it.
And then you mentioned, Nick, that it's good to have the septic and the well divided. And so the well head itself is in the back of the house. Right now where we are, we're in the front of the house.
Correct.
And so that's the most ideal, is to have those divided, right?
Correct. So modern standards, so this again depends on when was the house built. Modern standards, you must have a 100-foot separation between the two because you don't want that cross-contamination. Once you get between mid-60s, early 80s, it was about 75 foot. Before the mid-60s, it was about 50 foot. If you're in the 1800s, it literally could be 20 foot, 30 foot. They didn't really think about that cross-contamination as much. With this type of system, because of the age, obviously the well is not going to be that 100-foot distance. Not much you can really do about it besides moving one or the other, which means you're replacing the whole system. Not practical. But a modern system, you're not going to be able to get as close with the septic system. So pretty much where it's at right now, even though it's older, even though it's within that 100 foot, it's still okay because that's what it was permitted at. 100 foot's excessive. Like really you only need a few feet of distance, but they have that extra buffer just in case. Because not always will you have the well uphill. Sometimes the well will be downhill. And the old adage, as we all know, stuff happens to roll downhill.
Yeah. And so we were here today for a well inspection, a septic inspection. For the well inspection, you and we were here for at least 3 hours because you did a 3-hour well yield test. What are you checking for when you do that 3-hour well yield?
Great question. So when you think about the well, think about it like a giant straw, right? Underground, we have our aquifer. That's our cup. Now, it's not exactly like a lake. Over here in the Piedmont range, it's a lot of fractured rock. So you have all these little cracks in the ground, and you're punching a hole with the well in as many of them as you can do. The reason you want to run it for 3 hours, and in some counties like Baltimore County, you go up to 6 hours. The reason you want to run it for 3 hours is to empty the cup, right? So if you think about the straw, Every linear foot of that straw is about 1.5 gallons of water. So if you have a 100-foot well, that's 150 gallons of water just there. So you have to run it for an extended period of time to empty the amount of water in that straw, so that way you can do the math to figure out how much water is coming in to that straw. How you do that is every 15 minutes, you take a known volume. So in our case, we use a bucket and a stopwatch. You fill said bucket and turn on the stopwatch, do some math. And over the course of the 3 hours, you'll see it start high, fall down, and then it'll plateau. The plateau is your yield. That's how much water the well can produce. The fall is what's called your reserve. Now, in the state of Maryland, you got to start your yield at 8 gallons or more so that we can get adequate drawdown. But you'll usually see start high, fall, plateau. If all you see is a straight line, that means your well is yielding more than your pump is capable of producing, right? So in this particular circumstance, our pump was producing 8.3 gallons per minute. The well was drilled at 12. The difference between the two is the pump is not strong enough to get that volume of water. Not a problem. In the state of Maryland, minimum is 1. So as long as you're over 1, you're in good shape. If you're not doing a yield from the pressure tank, which is the big blue thing in the basement, or from the wellhead, you're not doing a well yield. You can't do it from a spigot.
Now, Nick, from a perspective of somebody who lives in a home with well water, how often should a homeowner check? One of the purposes of you being here, I should say, was you took a sample of the water. You're going to send it out to the lab to see if it's drinkable. How often should a homeowner check their water?
So this is a great question, and the good news is the EPA's already come up with that conclusion for us. So the EPA recommends to test your water at minimum once per year for bacteria, so both total coliform and E. coli, and for nitrates, both of which can change depending on seasonality. Did you run your well over with a lawnmower? Do you have a farm right behind your house? Maybe you decided to get chickens. Things can change in your local environment that can influence those results. So the EPA recommends to test your water for nitrates and bacteria at least once a year, and I second that recommendation. Now, I also will usually tell people switch up when you test it. Let's just say right now we're testing it in the spring. Maybe next time you test in the fall. Maybe you test in the summer. Maybe you test in the winter. You want to switch up when you test so we can get more data points to figure out, oh, maybe I get a spike of nitrates in the spring. Maybe it's because the guy's fertilizing his fields right behind your house. Those sorts of things, if you're not collecting data, you're not going to know what's going on in your water. So at least test once a year. But if you're really, really crazy, you could also do it every month.
Okay, and then a question switching back to the septic. Now we're living here with a septic field, a septic tank. We're not on public sewage. As a family of 3 or 4, how often am I going to have to pump my septic tank?
Great question. So the University of Maryland has said that the ideal pumping frequency is every 2 to 5 years. Now, the reason that sounds like a large gap between the two is because how often are you home, right? Do you work from home? If you work from home, obviously, and this is kind of a gross subject, but you're going to be using the bathroom more often. If you're putting a lot of really thick toilet paper down there, like that real premium stuff, you're also building up more solids in your tank. Do you have a garbage disposal? If you have a garbage disposal, guess what? Now you're putting more stuff into your system. UMD has gone ahead and said 2 to 5 years is the optimal pumping range. I would say in practice, most families of 4 are pumping every 3-ish years. If you work from home or you're heavily using that garbage disposal, maybe you're going every 2 years. If it's only 2 of you, maybe you go every 4 years.
Very good. Awesome. Now, I have not prompted you for this interview, Nick. You are quite the natural. Is there anything that you think a person that is considering purchasing a home with either well or septic should know? And this will be the last question I ask you.
So I think the most important thing that a buyer should know is when you're trying to figure out who do you have test your system, you need to go with somebody who's, one, qualified. I would argue they should not do the repair. So, for example, all of the defects I find, I'm not fixing. And the reason I think there needs to be a delineation between the two is, as a buyer, as a seller, if I tell you you have a problem with your septic system and I tell you it's going to be $10,000 to fix it, well, am I just fishing for $10,000 or do you actually have a problem? So I think that it's very incumbent upon whoever's inspecting your system, doesn't matter who they are, they should not be able to do the repair of that property. Same thing goes when it comes to qualification. Not everybody is qualified to inspect these. I hold inspection licenses. I also hold installer licenses. I've got a lot of training and a lot of licensing on this. But to get one of the licenses, All it takes is a 16-hour course, and a homeowner can take it. So what's to stop some random Joe Schmo from doing that same thing? So you want to make sure that whoever you hire, you vet, you ask, you talk around, get referrals. Most of our business is referral business because I think we produce a very high quality product. Not everybody's going to be as forthcoming with their education level. It's very important that they know what they're talking about and they don't do the repair.
Nick, couldn't agree with you anymore. I learned so much today just being here and popping the lid of the riser of the septic. You teaching me about all of the drainage. So shout out to you, Nick. Thank you so much. And shout out to Homeland Environmental for all of your needs. They do provide quite a bit of services. So thank you so much, Nick, and stay tuned.